Hi, my name is Peter. This is the Peter on Health channel. This video is called Crowds versus air quotes experts. First of all, you see I'm carrying a microphone. I think my internal microphone dying or something. There's crackling sounds. So hopefully this fixed the crackling sounds. Anyway, let's show you the image for this video. So you got crowds on the left side, experts on the right. And I got a picture of the recent Butler rally Trump gave in October. 100,000 people showed up, a big crowd. And the idea of experts. Hillary is an expert, John Kerry is an expert, Kamala is an expert, Obama is an expert, and our beloved Mr. Fauci. And on what subject? And the subject is the truth. How do we know it's true? How do we know it's true? Well, a simple way to discover something new is to ask an expert. Hey, expert in this area that I'm interested in, tell me what the truth is. And so you go to the people on the right-hand side and they'll tell you. But another way, and the internet really gave birth to this phrase came out of the internet the first time I heard it. There was the phrase called wisdom of the crowds. And the idea of wisdom of the crowds is that I might have some expertise, you might have some other expertise, and neighbor might have some other expertise, and then once we get to 1 million people, there's all these different kinds of expertise, variety, and let's say we all vote or issue our opinion on a certain subject. Maybe there's a majority that comes out, maybe there's pluralities, but somewhere in the crowd, from the crowd, not from any individual in the crowd, but from the collective of the crowd, like a idea of the likely truth will prevail. And so then we might lean on that, approach for deciding what's, maybe not it was true, but what's probable true and maybe worthy of more individual research by ourselves, so that we might okay, that's a good starting point, and then we'll go dive into that. So those are two diametrically opposed ways of arriving at the truth. One way is literally like a small child and a parent on the right-hand side. Well, the kid doesn't know anything, ask dad or mom, and then mom or dad give the edict. Or back in the days of religion, you'd ask the Pope or your priest, and the priest would tell you, and you had no right to contradict them. And if you did contradict them, you might be burned at the stake, So that's a simple method. I know nothing, you know everything, Mr. or Ms. Expert. And then, the crowd is something totally different, a totally different way of getting at the truth. And the relevance of this and why this is put in a political context is that certainly on the Democrat side, and why it is that I'm a former, I'm a citizen of Greece. I was born in Canada. And I became an American citizen in 2008 specifically so I could vote for Obama. And I voted for him again in, the next 2012 it was, I guess. And I supported Bernie Sanders. I still have a Bernie jacket, in the 2019 Democratic primaries. I was left, far left. And I ain't that no mo. In fact, I don't think I'll ever vote for. I'm hoping the Democrats die. I hope they go the way of the Whigs. And I think they just might in this election. And they just might because they've become the party of the experts. So I'll give you 3 examples of why the Democrats believe in the expert version of truth. During this election cycle, Hillary, Kerry, and Kamala have all said the same thing. The American First Amendment is an impediment to truth. Because on social media, People say all sorts of shit. Sometimes what they say is consistent with the messaging of government bureaucrats like these people. And sometimes it's inconsistent. It opposes, contradicts. And what they say is that contradictory information on social media is misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. And they believe they have the right to stamp out those inconsistent messages. They believe, like Twitter Files said, they should be able to call social media companies and say, that person right there who said that thing right there needs to be kicked off your platform. They are saying things that are inconsistent with what we're saying, and we're the keepers of the truth because we're the experts. Okay? They've all said that during this election cycle. Last week, Kamala looks like she's collapsing in the polls according to her own internal numbers of her campaign. And so the party is pulling out of the closet Obama and Bill Clinton. And there's little videos going around, the interwebs, of a couple snippets of these two guys. And the Obama one was really interesting, especially because it fit into this rubric. Obama, in this picture, and that's the picture from it, a couple black guys behind him, went to Pennsylvania to give a speech, and before the speech, I guess he was in some room full of black guys, and he was basically saying, and I'll paraphrase what he said, I'm the expert black guy. You have to listen to me, you peons. And he was basically telling them to vote for Kamala. But that's essentially what he was saying. I am the expert. You, in your opinion, does not matter. And a lot of people are offended by that. And then we have our beloved Mr. Fauci, Mr. Science, right? If you criticize Fauci, you are criticizing the science because, Fauci was the science. Who says that? The Pope. The Pope of the Catholic Church. What, criticize me? I'm like one step from God. What are you talking about? You can't criticize me. I'm like the holiest of the holy, right? So this idea of an expert who can't be criticized is what the Democratic Party is all about. They're all about that. And the Republican Party, people with TDS, right, that say, oh, Trump, he's like the dictator, blah, blah, blah. But I'll just say the fact that he accepted RFK, Tulsi Gabbard, Elon Musk, and Tucker Carlson, and now he's going to do a Joe Rogan interview, into his party. These are all former Democrats like me. But what they all believe in is the crowd. That's what they believe in. They're very, very suspicious of experts. Even though Elon is probably the greatest expert businessman ever, RFK is a super duper expert on the issues of, health and the environment. Tulsi is an expert on war. Tucker is expert on the media and how it works, and has developed some expertise from all the interviews he's done. But none of these people say, hey, I am the expert and you have to listen to me. And in fact, what they emphasize, what's interesting about the Trump campaign is each of those people I mentioned and Trump's other people have some different beliefs. And but they also have commonalities. And the commonalities are more important than the differences. And that's why they can then join up as a party. And that's why Trump named RFK and Tulsi to his transition team. They're going to pick who's in the administration. 2 former Democrats. You think they're going to pick Pompeo and Bolton and those disgusting people? No. No, so this is going to be a really interesting transition if the polls are right. So why am I bringing this topic up now, do you say? Is this a political topic? Is it about Trump and Kamala? Yeah, it is, because I'll just say now the quickest way you can tell who is a Kamala voter or a Trump voter is ask them what they think about experts. And do they use experts to figure out stuff for themselves on health, on other topics? Do they lean on particular voices and say, well, if that person said it, then must be true. I read the New York Times and that's my gospel. People say that, right? Like they're voting Kamala. And so anyway, like, where did this come for me? Where did this idea of crowds versus experts come to me? I was listening to a Joe Rogan podcast, a reporter named Schellenberger, and they were talking, I think they had many topics. It was 3 hours long. I only listened to 2.5 or whatever. I got tired of it. But Joe's a libertarian. He believes, people make their own decision about drugs, certainly, and other topics. But Schellenberger was more of a nanny state guy on that topic. Anyway, in the middle of their discussion, it occurred to me that a thought I had 20 years ago, and I published it, and the thought was in the phrase people versus corporations. And what happened was 21 years ago, I'd read 2 books, and I had concluded from reading those books, not from being an activist in the street, not from being out in public, anything like that, I'd concluded that a coming battle would be fought between people, skin and bones and heart and tissue and the creatures like us, against corporations, a fictional entity that does business. And that sounds weird, doesn't it? Well, and I will say in 2003, it was really weird because you could have searched on Google. This is Yandex. I used to use Google. I used to use DuckDuckGo. I used to use Brave Search, and it's just all like being corrupted, the search. So I use Yandex, which, Democrats would say it's a Russian, website, but it's Russian like Pavel Durov, Telegram, right? Like who's just about free speech, and privacy. Not about like supporting the Russian government. And I think Yandex is the same way. But anyway, point being here, I search on Yandex for the phrase people versus corporations. And I used to be the first result on Google because I was the only guy talking about it. But there was like 9 other people talking about it before they get to little old me. And that's me. And that's a paper I wrote in 2003. And it's, not too long, but, it's, it'll take you like less than a half hour to read. But the idea of it, like I said, I read 2 books right around that time. One book, it was called The Fourth Turning, right there. Click to the Amazon page. And the other book was called When Corporations Rule the World. It was a guy named David Corton, I think, wrote it. Yeah, When Corporations Rule the World. Fourth Turning and When Corporations Rule the World. And so I read those 2 books, and I read them very closely. And I concluded that we were entering a period in which there would be a quote-unquote war, whatever that meant in that context, between people and corporations. And I didn't like the phrase at the time because I knew that there were, I'm a person, you're a person listening, likely, or a dog. It's the internet, I don't know. But, okay, so we're people. Some of us work for big corporations, work at Google, work at Facebook, right? Like work at Monsanto, work at Lockheed. Lockheed's, was across the street from Yahoo, I remember. And but then some of those people are grunt workers, some of those people are the CEOs, the executive staff, right? So which people am I talking about when I talk about people? And it's kind of a gray, nebulous, over-inclusive word because some of the people are our enemies, right? They support subjugation of us. And then other ones are just struggling. Yeah, and they're working for the companies, but they're like certainly not wanting to subjugate us. And so the word corporation too was like over-inclusive. Because, like I have a corporation, it's my consulting business, and it's an LLC, and LLCs have members, and there's 2 members, myself and my wife, are the members of the consulting corporation I run. So when I say people versus corporations, am I talking about my little podunk corporation, consulting business? Am I talking about the mom and pop shops, in the street, the small businesses? No, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the multinational corporations, you know what I'm saying? So the word corporations was overbroad. So I never liked it at the beginning. It was too weird and fictitious. But let me say where the word came from. The word came from the book, The Fourth Turning. So now the fourth turning, let's just see if I click on that. It'll pop up the Amazon page. Yeah, there it is. And you'll see the picture of the book, The Fourth Turning. There it is. I'm not the only person that's read the book, The Fourth Turning. In fact, Steve Bannon, who was, part of the Trump team, had read it. And I heard him discuss it. And I think he misread it. And I think a lot of people have misread the book. Because there was this period in the 60s where there were these group of people called the hippies. The hippies. Turn on, turn out, and tune out. And they did drugs, and they had long hair, and they were, like having sex, and whatever, and playing psychedelic music. What Steve Bannon says is that's when America started heading off a cliff, and those hippies were the anti-Americans. They were the communists and, whatever, and thank God that period ended, or else we would have ended up off the cliff. And I have the polar opposite view. I say those hippies, those same hippies that Steve Bannon hates, were to America in the 60s what Thomas Jefferson and the revolutionary father figures of this country were in the 1770s. The hippies of the 60s were the revolutionaries in the 1700s. And so that's a pretty remarkable thought. Well, that remarkable thought comes from the analysis that led me to this belief about people versus corporations. So I'll just get into that briefly, just to say that what I discuss in this paper, that I'll put the link in the description, is this fourth turning is a historical hypothesis about America. And this idea about what America means goes back 500 years. And you say 500 years, we're only 250 years as a country. That's true as a country, but as an idea, we go back to Magna Carta and the War of the Roses and all that kind of stuff. And not only does the idea of America go back, 500 years, but there's phases and there's wars every 80 years. Okay, so 500 years ago, and every 80 years or so, there's an existential war, a war that if America loses that war, there's no more America. Okay? And in between the wars, during the 80 years, there's seasons. Right after the war is spring, then there's the summer phase, then there's the fall phase, and then there's the next winter, which is the next existential war. Okay? And so here's what I did. That's the book. That's Strauss and Howe, the authors. What I did in this paper is say, hey, I wonder if we could predict what the next war will be by some of the previous phases. And what I concluded reading the book and looking at all the patterns going back to the War of the Roses and the Magna Carta was that it was the summertime, not the fall, not the spring, but the summertime. The summertime where things happened that you could predict what the coming war, the coming winter would be about, what the two sides would be and what you'd fight about. Okay? And so, and again, a little more detail. The summertime is a time of social upheaval, of social movements, of people looking for more opportunity and dispersing power. And sometimes those movements succeed and the power is dispersed, and the people that were looking for more power, and looking for, more freedom and whatever, they gained it during the summertime. But often those efforts fail, and they fail miserably. And then coming in the next winter, it's the ones that failed in the previous summer are the ones that a war is fought about in the winter later. Okay, so that's pretty simple. So pre-wars are fought in the summer. It might not be a war, just a movement in the streets. But if it fails, then, 40 years later, people go and fight about it, and with guns usually, although I think this war is not going to be with guns. Okay, so anyway, if that was the case, then, as you study the 60s, and you're looking for people looking to expand power, diffuse the power, take it from concentrated sources and expand it out. And I'll say it was the hippies, the social movements that expanded power in the 60s were for women, blacks, and gays. Right? 4 women in 1964, Stanford Law School. I went in 1988, 50-50. Civil Rights Act passed in 1965. Obama is elected president in 2008. And gay stuff, we've gone way beyond the gay stuff. Now we got Rachel Levine, that's somebody else's name, but there's some guy who's pretending to, acting like a girl, who's like, a major military figure in the Biden administration, right? I think the gays have won so much so that it's gone 2 standard deviations away from that. So those social movements won in the 60s, but there was one that failed. One that came up unmistakably in the 60s that failed miserably by the 80s. And that movement was the anti-corporate movement, the anti-Monsanto, anti-Lockheed, anti-plastic companies, anti-all the mechanized, plasticized, fake stuff that the corporations were making and making shitloads of money on. The hippies were anti that. They were about free love and the soil, and Rachel Carson's Silent Spring book in 63. It was just, come on, let's bring the earth back to healthy and beautiful, and the birds fly and the butterflies sing, and we can have long hair and have sex anytime we want, and you listen to psychedelic music. And that was the hippies. That was the hippies. They were anti-corporate, and they wanted to diffuse power, and they wanted to have the crowd decide. So in that way, the fact that they were looking to diffuse concentrated power and spread it among more people than people who had it before, women, blacks, and gays, means they not the right-wingers, not the ROTC in the 60s, the Steve Bannons, were the true revolutionaries, like the American revolutionaries in the 1700s. And did this anti-corporate sentiment succeed? No. By the time of Reagan, these same hippies cut their hair and now became corporate leaders, like the fucking hypocrites, right? And so by the time I'm reading this book, in the early 2000s, I'm saying, oh, okay, that'll be the next war. So I'll call it People versus Corporations. Like I say, a lot of people pick that up. But, like I say, the problem I had right at the beginning was, like, I didn't like the phrase. People was overbroad and corporations was meaningless and overbroad. Corporation is a contract. It's a piece of paper. That's what a corporation is. It's a legal entity. It's not an actual thing. That's why, like that Supreme Court case that said corporations are people too, like, it's an abomination of the Constitution. It's taking the Constitution and, like, taking a crap on it, right? Like, it just, I mean, the founders who were anti the British corporations, right? Who were the tool of the imperial king, they were anti that shit. They were anti-corporate. And for the Supreme Court, recently in the last 10, 20 years to say that corporations are people too. And when what they're doing was going to small businesses like a bread, a cake maker shop or something like that, who just said, F you to the gays, like, who wanted a wedding cake, and they're like, sorry, we're, like, religious, and, like, whatever. And so they use that to say, oh, yeah, corporations are people too. So Monsanto now, and Disney, and Google, and, like, whatever, they're all people like you and me, according to that Supreme Court case. I mean, that's just, it's just hideous, right? But anyway, that's law. So in the last 5-10 years, I started thinking, okay, if it's not people versus corporations, maybe it's, I'll have an idea. America versus the WEF. That's it. America versus the WEF. And you're like, what's the WEF? Well, I'll say, well, it's the World Economic Forum. And you say, huh? Yeah, they're in Davos, Switzerland. They're a group of super rich people who, were, like, behind the whole COVID bullshit, the lockdowns, the mandates, the vaxes, like, all this stuff. They pre-planned it. Like, they war planned it before, and it was executed in America and all around the world. They're for climate change and, like, castrating kids and boys playing girls sports. I mean, they're for all that shit. Which the Democrats are all for that too. And I'll say, who hates American free speech? Certainly the Democrats do. I just said at the beginning of the video, the WEF hates it. The WEF hates it. They think the biggest danger in the world is America and freedom of speech in America. So there you go. America versus the WEF. Well, here's the problem I had with that, though. I who's, like, wrote this frickin' paper, right, in 2003, and I realized the name wasn't good, People versus Corporations, and I'm thinking America versus WEF. I never learned about the WEF until 10 years after I wrote that paper. I wasn't even aware of the WEF. I just became of it, I don't know how, but, like, maybe Alex Jones or whatever, but I'm just saying, like, if I ask my friends, half of them never heard of the WEF, and the other half that did know vaguely some things about it, but, like, not nearly even as much as I do, and even I don't even like to read WEF, white papers, right? Alex Jones reads all those for us. But here's my point, why that's a bad name. Because World War II was the Allies against the Nazis. and Imperial Japan. The 30s was about the workers against the robber barons. The 1860s was about the North against the slave-holding South, and the Revolutionary War was about the revolutionaries against the British Crown. Now, there's something interesting I'll point out about each one of those verses. One side, power is concentrated in the hands of a few. And the other side, power is dissipated in the hands of many. Basically, it's the crowd versus experts. Well, in that case, it's versus dictators or kings or, whatever. Robber barons, Hitler, Hirohito, the guy who owns like 100 slaves. That's concentrated power in one guy who's got life or death power over like 100 people. And the North is more diffuse because nobody could own anybody else in the North. And then same with the Revolutionary War. You got the imperial king, right, and the landowning barons against these ragtag farmers. Well, some of them were rich farmers like Washington and Jefferson, but a lot of the fighters were ragtag farmers. And power was completely diffused among them, and they voted for the Constitution. It wasn't just, Washington saying, hey, here's what we're doing. I'm the expert. No. That's anti-American. That idea is anti-American. It's a democracy where we all vote. So which is the funny thing about this election. Because these are the people that say democracy is on the ballot. And yet, what is democracy? Democracy is a crowd phenomenon where you let the crowd decide who's the leader, what the truth is, whatever, right? And did the crowd pick Kamala? No, the experts did. So how are you for democracy when you didn't use democracy to pick Kamala? How are you for democracy when you were trying to use the Justice Department to knock out your opponent using lawfare? And, I won't say you are doing it now, but somebody is trying to assassinate Trump. You're trying to, all means to keep that guy, your opponent, even if he wins a landslide election, to take over. And you people are saying democracy's on the ballot? You are un-American. You believe in experts, not the crowd, which is un-American. Un-American. And so the reason, I guess, why this really zings with me. Let me give you another example. It's like polls. So in this election season, there are polls that are run internally by the campaigns, and then polling, people, right? Nate Silver, New York Times Siena, Rasmussen, on and on and on. Each of those polls is a quote-unquote expert way of predicting the outcome of the election. It's expert because the pollster has to decide who to ask and what questions to ask, who they ask, and how often to ask these people. Right? I mean, you could, just go to registered voters, you could go to unregistered, you could go to, cities, you can go rural. There's all these choices to make as a pollster. And those choices you make influence what the polls say. Okay? And so, according to the pollsters, for example, the race is extremely tight. Like it's a coin flip tight. That's how tight it is. especially in the battleground states. It's 1 point up, 1 point down, for either of the candidates. So let me show you a crowd's way of figuring out how the race is going. So there's a site, there's other sites too, but there's a site I check into more often. It's called Polymarket, and it's a betting site where you actually place money to bet on many things, but there's obviously one of the main things people are betting on now is the outcome of the presidential election. And this red line is the bets on Trump winning, and the blue line is the bets on Kamala winning. And as I'm talking to you right now, Trump is up 15 points. 15 points. And just back in, October, at the beginning of October, we're like 2 weeks into October. On October 1, it was like a dead heat. Dead heat in Polymarket. And in 2 short weeks, right here, there's a 15-point swing. So why am I calling Polymarket a crowds thing? It's because that curve is not based on one expert deciding who to ask questions for. That's on you or me or anybody else who wants to put 57 cents down, on Trump, or I can, if I think Kamala's going to win, I can, that'd be a great bet. 42 cents, for Kamala, and if Kamala ends up winning, I'm making a lot of money, right? So this is about my money and placing my money on who I think's going to win. And like if I was like trying to make money on this election, I should have put money on, and I think Trump's going to win. I should have put money like right here. Look at that, right after the convention maybe, right? And or the debate or whatever, and Trump was down at 46. So that would have been a great time to put some money on Trump. But here's the point. That number today, 15-point swing, is not an expert number. It's a crowd number. And the crowd is saying, yeah, we don't think, Kamala's going to win. Okay? So that's an example. And I'll give you another example. Here it is. And one that like turned my gut. So here's the Stanford magazine. And it's a magazine from, I think, was it May of 2021. May or March of 2021. And so you think back. May of 2021. What was going on then? Oh yeah, we were in the middle of COVID land. We're in the middle of the lockdowns, and we were 5-ish months into the rollout of the quote-unquote vaccines, which are actually gene therapies, according to the old definition of gene therapy. And so there was 2 sides. There were the what I call the propaganda side. The gene therapy are called vaccines. You conspiracy nut job. They're safe and effective, and they're going to end the pandemic, and you take it, and you're not going to be able to get COVID again and pass on, and all the things they were telling us back then. The experts were telling us. And the other side were people like me saying, it's an experimental gene therapy which seems to have autoimmune type method of actions, and maybe not quite as safe as you're suggesting. Of course, people like me, I didn't say that out publicly, I just said it to friends in conversation when they were like, why are you not taking the jab, Peter? And I would say, well, let's just take Pfizer at their word of how the mRNA works. I'm not going to bore you with that now, but my point is, my position was squelched on social media. People like me were canceled, and if I was a doctor, credentialed like a guy like McCullough, put a little more light in this room, I'd have been stripped of all my credentials, or Malone or any of these other guys on the other side. And that's what the Democrats did. That's what these idiots did. And that's what flipped me politically, right? Like, it was like this idea that I was going to, trust an expert. But what came out of this magazine and why, like, my stomach overturned was they had a few articles in there. This is May 2021, and in this picture you see it's a camel with a bat on top of it, and they were just basically making this point, like, and saying it like dogma, like, with all the humans living everywhere and going into different spaces and tearing down forests, we're starting to intermingle too much with animals, and viruses are moving between bats and sheep and goats and pigs and camels and this and that, and eventually they come into us. And so this pandemic we're in the middle of is just the first of many because of this effect, right? And did they anywhere in the article mention, Ralph Barrick and the Wuhan Institute of Virology and like gain of function research and all that? No, they don't say anything like that, because anybody talking about those words back then was a conspiracy theorist, right? Now, that wasn't the article that bothered me, though. It was another article, and it was about free speech on the campus. And there was an article about a guy named Scott Atlas, who was a Stanford professor, who was saying, these lockdowns are bullshit, the whole masking requirements, back when that was like scientific dogma coming out of Fauci. And what Stanford did, 50 professors signed a letter condemning what Scott Atlas said and condemning Scott Atlas himself. So I don't know if he's still a teacher there or like whatever, but like he was shut up by 50 experts. And when I read that, it brought to mind those 50 deep state intelligence officers who in 2020 elections said, oh, the Hunter Biden laptop story has all the hallmarks of Russian disinformation. This is the way these people think. If they just had one expert debate Scott Atlas, that guy probably would have lost the debate. So instead what they do is they say, well, let's get 2. No, let's get 3. Well, let's get 50 because it's 50 times 1. Wow. You can't say like at 50 people, and they're experts, not just 50 randos. These aren't 50 randos. These are 50 experts. The gold standard of how we determine truth. You got 50 of them lining up? Well, what they're saying must be true. And when I see Stanford doing that, I'm like, I'm a Stanford law grad, and I'm just like, I just wanted to puke reading that article. Puke. I mean, and as, they turned out to be wrong, and the 50, deep state people about the Hunter Biden laptop turned out to be wrong. So just let you know, anytime they trot out like 50 experts, it's because they're lying and they can't debate it one-on-one as an expert. So this is what I'm saying about this expert thing. It is un-American. It is anti-American. So this idea that Trump wins and democracy's lost is called projection. Because these are the fuckers who are going to end America. Because America is about free speech. And they want to end it. because free speech is unallowable in a world ruled by experts. And that's, you have it. And so I'll just say, like, I'm tomorrow hiking with my friend. I'm going to ask him what he thinks about experts. I'm going to ask another friend. This first friend, I mean, is like 8 jabs and counting, and he'll get the COVID jabs out the yin-yang until he dies. And the other friend is like most of my friends who like stopped at 3 or 4. I'm going to ask this friend, like, what was your reason for stopping? Because my 8 jab friend has a different hypothesis of the reason. So I have to ask that in a really innocuous, open way. But I think I'll start by talking about experts and just ask these questions, like where you stand on like getting your truth from experts, and how much weight do you give the expert. So anyway, that's the end of this video. The Huberman, video I did, it was, is Huberman useful? It was the same question. It was about crowd versus expert. The expert scientist running a study about health versus me, expert in my own health. And me as a member of the crowd that can report my results. Everybody reports their results, and we can, make a decision maybe on the plurality and maybe, whatever, or I can just trust the expert. Trust the Huberman who is running the study and reading the study so I don't have to. And that's, I guess, what I had a revulsion for. Just like I had a revulsion for Stanford ganging up on Scott Atlas with 50 experts. F that is what I say. That's the way America ends in a toilet bowl. And with that, I'll say stay healthy, my friends. Until next time.